Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. We're going to be going over just a little bit about the SK dry fluid cooler today. It's kind of a niche product, but the main reason I just want you guys to see what's out there and get a little bit of feel for it. It's definitely got some good benefits and features and things. So we'll just cover a little bit of the installation and some of the features and benefits today. Maybe take up about a half hour of your time. So we will go ahead and get started. Carly's not with us today. It's just me. If you have any questions, I'm sure you've been to this webinar before, you can raise your hand. You can type out your question and I'll try to get them probably towards the end, as it's kind of hard to mediate, excuse me, as we're going along. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, this is me, a little bald-headed guy. So if you need anything, shoot me an email. There's my phone number there as well. This is the SK series dry fluid cooler. It kind of looks like a condenser unit. It does have an ECM fan on it, a little pipe shield off to the lower right there, and then the access door right above it. So on the other side, there's a coil, vertical coil. So again, kind of looks like a condenser unit. It's designed to remove heat from the geothermal heat pump fluid, so like the sourced water. And on this unit, there's two configurations available. There's outdoor air only, so if you don't have a loop field, which makes this kind of nice. If you've got an SK dry fluid cooler, if you do a lot of geo, you may want to have one on hand. And, it's good for, let's say, in the middle of the winter up in Minnesota. Somebody wants their propane furnace failed and they want to put a geothermal unit in. Well, the ground's frozen and you can't get a loop in the ground in, January or February. You can actually hook up this SK series fluid cooler and it could be your loop basically, which would be the outdoor air only operation. So just use outdoor air, and then you could get them by until the spring, where then you could put in your ground loop. So don't let not being able to put a ground loop in immediately stop the sale of the geothermal unit. In hybrid operation, it's basically the fluid cooler is in parallel with the source loop. So maybe you've got maybe they've got a 5-ton loop in the ground and they decided to go with like an 8-ton water-to-water unit because they added on to the home and put some radiant in. You could, instead of putting more loop in the ground, you could add this to the loop. Or you could, if they have problems with their loop field getting too hot or too cold, winter or summer, they've got, it's not quite big enough, then you could add this dry fluid cooler as well. It is available in 3.5 and 5 tons, so 040 and the 060, and it's 230 volt single phase only. If you look down the last little SK 040, that's the model nomenclature. Really the only option that you have on this is where the L is located. That's either going to be a flow switch with a pump that's already on site, or like a flow center pump, or you can get the load pump for it if you're not going to use it with a loop field. So you can just pump it from the fluid cooler to the unit itself. If you're ever at Enertech in Greenville, take a look on the west side of the building. We have a SK fluid cooler sitting there, and if you're ever in the shop or someone's there and wants to see it, just ask for me when you're there and we'll take a look at it. We've got a couple air handlers hooked up to it, and we've got no loop field hooked up. We're just running the SK series fluid cooler with the unit itself. All the units should be placed on a concrete slab slightly larger than the base of the unit. Only a concrete slab is recommended due to the size and weight of the unit. It's kind of large. It's probably 3.5 feet long and 1.5 feet wide by, I don't know, probably 3.5 feet tall with the legs on it. So it's a pretty big piece of equipment. You must have a minimum of 2 inches above grade with adequate draining on that pad. You don't really want water to stand on that pad. It has a tendency to freeze and then break the concrete. So you may want to make sure it's draining properly. Must be located in a way to allow the unit to be serviced without removing the pipe or other permanently installed fixtures. So give yourself a little bit of room away from the home, similar to a condenser on an air conditioner, or a heat pump that's sitting outside, air source heat pump. So obviously you're gonna have to have a little bit of clearance in there to for your piping and for your electrical. So make sure you've got a little bit of room between the structure and the unit. Make sure you've got the proper voltage to the at the home, and verify that you've got the proper unit. Again, we only have 2 units, so hopefully we won't ship you the wrong unit. It doesn't happen too often, I don't think, but again, we have a 3.5 ton and a 5 ton. Make sure when you get these units, anything can happen during shipment, so check the contactors in your electrical connections and make sure that they're tight, they haven't loosened up during shipment. If they do loosen up, it causes heat to build up and wires burn up and things like that. So make sure there's no rubbing wires or the sheet metal, and copper is not rubbing on any wiring. And take a look at the manual. Obviously become familiar with the components. If you know you're going to install one tomorrow and you've got it in your shop, pull the manual out, take it home. I don't expect you to read every word, but it is nice to see. There's some dip switches and things to set this up, and we'll cover that as we go along, but you may not remember that. And so you've got to, it's similar to all of our geo units. There's something you've got to set up when you go to install it. So, there's dip switches and things like that. So just make sure you look at that manual so you know how it's supposed to start up, and it'll go a lot smoother for you. It's funny, I was at a training one time, and it was in the evening, and it was a pretty good class, big class. And, I told them, if you know you're going to install a unit, take the manual home, take a look at it. I had a young kid raise his hand. You can tell he's fairly new in the business. He's an installer. He's probably 19, 20 years old, but he raised his hand and said, I just want to let you know, we're not going to read the manual. It's like, well, if you're not going to read the manual, what are you doing? And, you're not wanting to learn. So we've got to be able to, learn always. We're always progressing. So these manuals, it's going to make the startup go so much smoother. You're not going to have to wait and call tech support. We put those manuals out there for a reason. So always take a look at them. That one technician, I thought his service manager was going to drop dead on the floor from shock when he said that, but that was pretty good. That's one of the funnier ones I've heard. Flow requirements must be verified by the installer for each application. We don't really know what size loop field you're putting it on, how much piping you got to run. So make sure you're installing pressure temperature ports. That's really the only way we're going to find out how much water flow we're moving is pressure drop. So make sure we're putting PT ports in, and always check the flow when we start the unit up. If you determine that the loop temperature is going to drop below around 23 degrees, the unit will have to be bypassed and drained completely, or freezing will occur. So if your loop temperature gets below 23, then shut it down, drain it out. It's usually going to happen up northern US, Canada, more than likely. So we normally would have freeze protection down to 15 degrees, but we want to give it a little bit of safety factor in it. So that's why we say 23 degrees. Here's the unit over here. If you're outside in the grass, it's not really too big of a deal, but if you're on concrete or an asphalt driveway or something like that, put a drop cloth down or a cardboard from the unit itself when you've got it, and flip the unit upside down. So that basically what we're going to do, we're going to take the bolts and the feet and put on the bottom of the unit. So on the SK040, there's 2 mounting legs, and the SK60 has 3 mounting legs. So make sure we get those legs put on there. That'll get it up out of the snow level more than likely, unless you're way up north somewhere, and it really won't. But in order to install this pipe protector, if you look at the picture on the lower right there, that little box is sitting towards the bottom of the unit, that's your pipe protector. So you're going to remove the door. It's got the little handle on there right above that protector, and it's going to expose the brackets that the bottom tabs of the door and the pipe connector slip onto. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to get those tabs lined up. They'll line up pretty good. Obviously, you got to put your water lines on there first before you put the pipe protector on. You can remove the bracket that's there and disregard, save the screws for when you put the pipe protector back on. It is 2 pieces. There's an inner slip cover and an outer shield. Make sure the inner slip is inside the outer piece before mounting it to the unit. And then basically it's going to slide into place over your pipe and protect it from getting hit by, a trimmer or a lawnmower, or something like that. Dog chewing on it, who knows. But the left side of the pipe protector will fit over the source in and source out. The tabs on either side will slip behind the tabs of the water connection plate. The right side of the pipe protector will sit behind the flange on the bottom plate, and this 2 screws that we removed earlier will attach the top flange of the pipe protector. For some reason you lose those screws in the grass or whatever, they're just a self-tapping 5/16 screw. So you can, I'm sure you'd have one on your truck if you lose it. So not a big deal. Make sure you take there's 3 more screws provided in the bag with all the feet and all that, and use it to attach both tabs to the water connection plate and the right side of the pipe protector. I know it sounds a little bit more difficult. Once you get this unit and get that box out there, it doesn't really take instructions to get it on there. It's pretty self-explanatory. So the inner slip cover is used to cover the gap between the bottom of the outer shield and the ground. After you get that pipe shield on, you can go ahead and you may want to leave the door off so you can set up some dip switches, but once you're done with that, don't forget to put the door back on. During outdoor air operation, the fluid cooler only uses outdoor air as the heat sink. So it's very similar to like an air source heat pump, except the fact that we're using water instead of refrigerant in that coil. You can use a mixture of water and antifreeze in the loop, which I would recommend, especially if you think that it's going to get near that 23-degree mark. Anytime it's going to get 32, I mean, you're going to need some antifreeze in there. Normally, we already put antifreeze in our source loop, so it can run through the source loop water. It can run right through the fluid cooler with no issues with the antifreeze mixture. It'll be just fine. In hybrid operation, the fluid cooler is connected in parallel with the ground loop. Basically, the fluid cooler cools the fluid in parallel with the ground loop. So it's working in conjunction with the ground loop. This setup maximizes the temperature difference between the outdoor air and the fluid itself. Normally, it's used to augment the ground loop. So if you've got a hot loop or, in the summer, you can add this to it rather than add more loop to the ground, to the source water. It uses a microprocessor-based printed circuit board, and it will display status and fault conditions. You can figure out, in order to configure the operating mode that you want to choose, there are some dip switches, and we'll talk about those here in just a second. The fan and the pump for the fluid cooler are determined by the operating mode, the fluid type, air temperature, and fluid temperature. So it looks at quite a bit of things and decides if it needs to run it, when it needs to run the pump or the fan. Again, dip switches and the LEDs indicate the configuration as well as the fault condition to aid in your diagnostics of the unit itself. There's a entering air temperature sensor. Again, that's measuring ambient air temperature near the heat exchanger. EWT sensor, which is entering water temperature sensor, and it's measuring the entering fluid temperature. And then FS, which is your flow switch. There's an optional flow switch. It's a dry contact input, and basically it's a paddle switch, and it closes when the fluid pushes up against that paddle switch and closes the circuit. Just like any of our other flow switches that we have in our units. The CCN is your compressor contactor. This is a 24-volt input coming from the compressor contactor on the lockout board in the heat pump. It's connected to CC on the fluid cooler board, and basically it tells the fluid cooler when the compressor is running. It's a 24-volt signal to the board. Whenever it sees O, it realizes that that is a cooling call, and it's coming from the O terminal on the heat pump lockout board. And it'll be connected to the O on the fluid cooler. Again, indicates that it's in cooling mode. Fan inputs, it's a dry contact input from the fan alarm output. And it's connected to the fan 1 and the fan 2 terminals on the control board in the fluid cooler. So basically when the fan is off, input is open. When the fan is running in normal operation, the fan alarm output is closed. If the fan alarm output is open for 30 continuous seconds while fan is running, a fan alarm will trip. Fan output, the fan control output is 24 volts AC, which energizes the fan relay. Its power to the fan is applied via common and normally open contact on that. So once it gets 24 volts, it will start up your fan. It does have a pump output. It's a pump control output. So again, it's a 24-volt AC signal, which energizes a relay for the pumps. And again, it's the common and normally open contact. So the power closes the contact and tells the pump to run. Your power connections, the circuit board requires 24-volt input from the transformer, which is either in the fluid cooler or the heat pump, depending on the type of fluid cooler that was ordered. So you can get the 24 volts from the heat pump, or you can order the fluid cooler with the transformer in it. If you have a flow switch in the fluid cooler, then you will have a transformer. If you have an internal pump rather than a flow switch, then you will not have a transformer. So if you're going to use the pump that's a pump that comes with the unit rather than your flow center, then it will not have a transformer. So you'll use the power, low voltage from the geo unit to power the circuit board on the fluid cooler itself. Water antifreeze protection, which is switch number 3 on the dip switches. In all options, switch number 3 must be turned on for a loop with antifreeze and off for a loop with just water. So very similar to any of our other units. You know, we're going to tell it whether you've got antifreeze in it or whether it doesn't. because that's going to give you your freeze protection settings. Obviously, it's there to protect from freezing. So if you have antifreeze in the system and you forget and if you leave it in the off position, then it'll just lock out prematurely rather than let it run for a little bit longer time when the water temperature gets a little bit lower. So option 1, you've got an internal pump with your compressor contactor and O. So in that situation, switch 1 is off, switch 2 is off. Basically in that mode, outputs from the heat pump enable the fluid cooler to heat or cool the loop. In loop cooling mode, when the compressor is on, the pumps turn on, then the fan will turn on as well, as long as the air temperature is at least 40 degrees for water and 25 degrees for water and antifreeze mixture. So that's your freeze protection settings. So you've got 25 degrees for water and antifreeze mixture and 40 degrees for straight water. Also, when the fluid temperature is greater than the air, plus 2 degree deadband. So 42 degrees for straight water and 27 degrees for antifreeze solution. If the air temperature is less than the freeze protection setting, the pump will run all the time. And that's to keep that fluid moving so we don't have to worry about it freezing up, obviously. Option 2, this will be switch 1 on, switch 2 off. This will be only loop cooling is allowed. So the fan and the pump are going to run when the air temperature is above the freeze protection setting of 40 degrees or 25, depending on your dip switch. And the fluid temperature is greater than the air temperature plus 2 degree deadband. Again, if the air temperature is less than the freeze protection setting, the pump will just stay on. Keep it from freezing up. Option 3. So now you'd have a combination of option 1 and 2, which is switch 1 off, switch 2 on. Basically, when in this mode, the O signal output from the heat pump will do loop heating or cooling according to the same logic as option 1. Basically, which will automatically perform the loop cooling according to the temperature logic, again, based on your 40 and 27. Loop cooling is active when the air temperature is above the freeze protection setting. Also, the fluid temperature is greater than the air temperature plus your 2 degree deadband, so just like option 2. In loop heating, the compressor will run when there's a CC call from your thermostat. When the air temperature is above the freeze protection setting, it's going to run. Also, the fluid temperature is greater than the air temperature plus your 2 degree deadband. So this would have, this option 3 is an internal pump, and it's a combination of options 1 and 2. Option 4, there'll be no internal pump, but you've got a flow switch, no compressor contactor or O. So that would be switch 1 on, switch 2 on. Basically, when in this option, the fluid cooler runs in loop cooling independently from the heat pump. So when the fluid cooler detects flow from an outside pump, it's going to engage the fan according to the logic. So loop conditioning enabled when the following conditions are met. So when the flow switch is closed, the air temperature is at least 40 degrees for water and 25 degrees for the antifreeze solution. And when the fluid temperature is greater than the air temperature. So that'll be your 42 deadband of with 2 degrees, so you have 42 and 27. So it's going to make sure that these conditions are met, and then it'll run. So it kind of works really somewhat independent of the heat pump. It does rely on the heat pump's flow from the external pumping, but it'll look at water and air temperatures, and then decide whether it's going to run or not, as long as the flow switch is closed. The fault indicators, again, you have entering air temperature sensor out of range. The normal range is -40 to 140. If it is out of range, the yellow LED light will blink, indicating the fault. And there will be a 24-volt signal sent to the L terminal or the lockout terminal. So if you've got that going back to your heat pump and then to your thermostat, then it'll let the thermostat know that there's an issue. These sensors don't fail really that often. If they do, they're going to ohm out and they're going to be shorted or open. So if they're showing resistance, more than likely it's good. You don't really have a whole lot of sensor issues. I would more check the connection of the sensor at the board itself. EWT is an entering water temperature sensor. Its normal operating range is -15 to 120. Obviously, it gets out of that range. It's a fault condition, and it's, again, the yellow LED will start flashing. If both the EAT and EWT sensors are bad, the yellow LED will blink 4 times. Now, you don't have to remember how many blinks are going to mean this or that. It will tell you in the manual and on the wiring schematic on the door of the unit. There is a fan alarm. When the fan is running in normal operation, obviously the fan alarm output is closed. The fan alarm will have to be open for 30 continuous seconds while the fan is running for the fan alarm to be tripped. And that's an orange LED, and it's going to kind of flash similar to like a heartbeat, so once per second. Again, you will get a 24-volt signal to your L terminal as well. Maintenance, there's not a ton to do on here. It does have an air coil, so you'll have to clean it. But make sure that the unit is, doesn't have any snow buildup. There's no bushes that are, covering it up. Keep the grass away from it. Any leaves or paper, just like a standard condenser air source heat pump sits outside. And, make sure there's no cottonwood or anything like that that's plugging it up and restricting the airflow. You can vacuum the coil to remove any debris in the fins. I don't recommend knocking the ice off the coil surface. Following an ice or severe storm, it could cause the fins to bend or even break, and then you're going to have some water leakage. So if you want to get that ice off, you could run some water over. It's not really going to hurt the unit to run water over the air coil. I mean, it sits outside, so it's rated for outdoor operations. So getting a little bit of water on there is not really a big deal. But yeah, you can vacuum it as well. Similar, it looks somewhat similar. It is coated, kind of like a blue tint to it. So it is a coated coil, but it looks more like a aluminum thin copper tube, but I think it's all aluminum, but does not look like the micro channel coils. Looks more like a standard coil. Again, if the coil becomes dirty, cottonwood is a really bad thing, especially here in the Midwest. It will cause all kinds of problems. So you can wash it off with a garden hose. Obviously, don't get water into the control section, but that's on the side in its own little compartment. So put the door back on the electrical connections before you spray it out with water. You can, once you take off that door to get to the controls, you'll be able to see the inside of that unit. So if there's any grass or debris or leaves or anything inside of there, go ahead and clear all that out of the bottom area there. Now you can either get access through that electrical compartment, or you can take the top off the unit. The top's real easy to take off the unit, and then you can get down in there and remove that stuff. So basically that's the fluid cooler. We have a bunch of these out in Hawaii. We've got a military base out there that we're doing some work for, or that we're supplying the units. Obviously in Hawaii, we can't really bore into the ground or dig into the ground. It's all rock. So they can't really use a ground loop, but they want to use geothermal. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, it's not why we came up with the unit, but it certainly pushed it quite along pretty good when we got that option with that base. So again, if you know, if the dealer wants to, you know, keep one of these around and use it as a loop field replacement while they're, you know, trying to get a geo in and can't get the loop field in, it's a perfect idea for that. So I know we've had ours running, and we're doing a couple air handlers that are hydronically, and it's been working for about 6-8 months now, and for a new addition we have on it at our office in Greenville, and we've had to tweak it a little bit, but other than that, I mean, it's been reliable. It's more of how we were learning to set it up. So, you know, we learn just like everybody else out there, and we just got to start up the unit and let it run and test it and play with it a little bit and make some tweaks. But it's been a pretty quality piece of equipment, and I think it's a great option to have for Enertech. I don't know if there's any other manufacturers that have something like this, but I think it's a great option. So I tell you pricing, but I try to stay out of the pricing business. After I got out of the residential side of things, it's really nice not to have to deal with pricing. You always get yelled at by homeowners for pricing and things like that. So it's nice to kind of step away from that. But if you need anything, you know, you've got my email. It's here, or you can call and do technical support. You can always ask for me. Obviously, right now I'm working remote, so if you call that number, they can forward over to me if I'm available. So again, thanks for your time, and have a wonderful rest of the week. Looks like it's going to warm up, at least here for a little bit. Get a little rain, but finally a little bit of warmth. So if I don't talk to you guys before the Memorial Day, have a wonderful Memorial Day and stay safe out there. Thank you.